Greetings everyone and welcome back to the bench. On the bench I have the Magnavox model FM43 radio chassis. It's a tube unit, of course. And if you watched the last video, you remember this worked. It was really out of alignment, and once I aligned it up, it was pretty sensitive. Well, there's some other things I wanted to do to it. I decided I was going to replace a bunch of parts, but I'll get to that momentarily. Another problem it had is when you tuned it, it was like a squeaking sound and it was kind of hard to turn. So what I did is lubricated all these little pulleys for the dial cord. Now it turns very easy and there's no squeaking sound. Another problem I had was the speakers. One of the speakers, the voice coil was seized up. It was kind of rusty in there and it seized up. And they use these stupid retainer clips that you can't really get off. So what I did is got a couple of them off, but the rest of them broke. So what I did is I filed all these down evenly, all 8 of them. And I got an 832 tap, and I tapped the hole out so I can just use screws and washers to mount the speakers down. And, well, here's some speakers. Here's the one speaker that was good. It doesn't sound very good. It's kind of warped. You can see the paper's a little bit rippled there. Well, I have another speaker here. This sounds better. Both are kind of shrill sounding. So I had this speaker here. This is a new speaker. It fits right in. I'll have to drill out these holes so it to fit over. Otherwise there's a gap right now. So there's a small gap there. So I have to drill these holes out. Now this speaker is not as loud, but it's less shrill and it sounds a lot better. I don't care if the radio's loud. I'd rather have a radio sounding better. So I'm going to put this speaker in. Now the sound, especially the lower frequencies that come out of the rear of the speaker, they go through this hole here and go to the front and cancel out with the sound emitted from the front. So I took cardboard and sealed up this hole with hot glue, reinforced it. And this is reversible if I decide to put another speaker in. But if this one sounds good enough, I'm not going to worry about it. Of course, the output transformer was riveted to the one speaker, the one with the frozen voice coil. And I had to pretty much destroy it anyway. It was riveted on there, so I had to drill those out, recover the output transformer. One concern is both of those speakers were 4 ohms wired in parallel, which would be a 2 ohm impedance. So this transformer was probably set up to drive 2 ohm loads. And I'm just going to use 1 4 ohm speakers, but I think I can get away with that because in these low power, cheapy little output stages in these radios, might actually get wider frequency response driving a higher impedance, though I'll get less output. But again, I'm not really concerned with how loud it is. I'd rather have better fidelity out of it. Now to be clear, I wouldn't recommend doing this with a hi-fi amplifier, a hi-fi tube amplifier. I would certainly recommend using the proper impedance load in that case. So as far as the parts I'm going to replace the selenium rectifier. These can age and go up in internal resistance. They can also short and emit some pretty acrid smoke. I'm also going to replace these 2 capacitors. I think this capacitor, that's just a tone control capacitor, so I'm not concerned with that. It seems to work okay. I'm going to replace this capacitor and this one here. I checked these carbon composition resistors and they're in spec. except for, I don't know if you can see it, there's one down here. You can see part of it. There's one down there that's 100 ohms, but it meters out at about 150, so I need to change that one. And I have to find a place to mount the transformer, the output transformer, because before it was riveted to the speaker. I think it'll fit right here, and it'll clear the tubes, so no problem there. That's really the only space I have to mount this thing. You know, I can also mount it to the wood, but then if the chassis is pulled out, then you have to remove the screws from that. I'd rather have it part of the chassis itself. So yeah, that's about it. I have to get working on this thing. One thing I noticed, it seems like somebody was hacking at this thing before. You can see there's where the through hole is on this board. The trace is missing, and you can see several spots. Over here, it looks like somebody's been at it. Hopefully it's not one of these boards where the traces lift real easy. Somebody just might have been a little rough with it, trying to desolder and replace components. Around the output tube, I don't know if you can see it, but see the circular cracks? I'm going to have to reflow that solder, because, you know, that'll lead to a poor connection. Alright, well, warm up the soldering iron and get to work on this thing. Snickers. Okay, so I have the component replacement done, and I mounted the output transformer here on the side. There's really no other place for it to go, but it'll be fine. So I replaced this capacitor here, and the original capacitor, it checked out just fine. It looked like a suspect kind that would fail, but really no leakage at all with it. But anyway, it's replaced. I replaced the selenium rectifier with a diode and resistor. This selenium rectifier seems okay. I put 100 milliamps through it, and it was dropping about 8 volts across it, so that seems to be in spec. However, these things can go bad. Sometimes they can spark and emit smoke, so might as well replace it. So I did some calculations. I figure there's about 100 milliamps going through this part of the radio. So since the line voltage is higher now, I went with a 10 volt drop. So I used a 100 ohm resistor, and the dissipation would come out to 1 watt. I ran the radio for a couple hours and checked the temperature, and it was fine. It's dissipating about 1 watt. This resistor here, that's the one part that did have a changed value. In fact, when I was taking it out, it broke. The thing was baked. It's supposed to be 100 ohms, and it metered out around 150. So that was lowering the voltage to some of the circuit. The next thing was replacing these capacitors. I don't know if you can see it. There's 3 capacitors there. No way they would fit on that board, so I had to make a little subboard for them and use solid copper wire to connect it. So it's in there good enough. It's not going to go anywhere. And of course, these capacitors checked okay. They weren't leaking too bad. Where's the other one? Here's the other one I replaced. Pyramid. So those were good as well. So next I got to get the speaker mounted, get the front back on the chassis, and then I'll get this aligned and put it back in the case. Okay, I have the front attached and the speaker is in. I used those rubber washers underneath the metal washer to help hold this down because there was some space. So turn it on here. Watch that tube in the middle. I think that tube is about ready to pop. Well, I tuned it up and aligned the dial and everything. Got it as sensitive as I can get it. So let me put it in the case here and wrap this up. Okay, I have the radio all assembled. It's actually a couple days later. I tested it yesterday. I let it play for 6 hours and again a couple hours tonight. Doing just fine here. I moved it into my front room. Sitting atop my Boston Acoustics A100s. That when I die, I'm going to have them buried with me. That's how much I like them. But anyhow, I'll just take you up and down the dial here. On AM.
Down and around the Savannah.
5 dies of cancer. It's still more fun than this.
At loud station 700 WLW out of Cincinnati. Well, close to Cincinnati.
Story this hour.
You can see it's, or you can hear it's picking up pretty weak stations. Got a pretty sensitive AM tuner in it.
56-year-old Angelo Boris was charged
For such a risk is WLS AM.
Mike Brown on the coverage, but also putting pressure on the quarterback for the Redhawks was Bart Barati.
Yeah, Barati was out there to put pressure on him.
Well, Saturday afternoon. City Thunder tonight. Joel Embiid's left.
Okay, we'll go to FMAFC.
How long is psycho, your vertical step?
It's on sight, yeah.
Teach my children to cry.
You take control.
Found you like a melody.
North Decker Avenue after the shooting was reported around 9.
Shaking your head in.
Okay, so there you go. It's working pretty good. If that one tube does blow, I do have a spare, but you know, I'm not going to replace it. I'm just going to let it go until it quits. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching.